The legendary life of a Jedi Master ends not with glory, but with smoke rising over distant hills. I watch Imperial shuttles break the dawn sky above Seradar, their engines cutting through 16 years of silence. My garden will go untended today. The vegetables will wither. The herbs will dry in the Sunday. Strange how such small concerns fill my mind as they come to kill me. You may have heard stories of Master Ren Dalen, hero of the Outer Rim sieges. The hollow recording spoke of victories, of lightsabers raised against impossible odds. They never told you how we Jedi died inside long before Order 66, how we became the very thing we claimed to fight. The red glow of an Inquisitor's blade moves through the trees now. My former Padawan returns, wearing the darkness I helped create. When legends finally die, do they leave wisdom behind, or only cautionary tales of pride? I remember when they called us guardians, keepers of the peace. The fires of Seradar burn on the horizon now, consuming the last traces of what I built here. Strange how the smoke carries memories. I have lived too long, outlived my usefulness, outlived my order. The Force has always had a peculiar sense of irony. To survive when so many others fell, to become a relic while still breathing. The Imperial shuttle broke atmosphere an hour ago. I felt the vibration through stone and soil before I heard it, that familiar cold sensation blooming in my chest. The presence I have been waiting for, the one I helped create. My greatest failure returning to complete our circle. They say a Jedi does not know fear. Another lie we told ourselves. Fear has been my constant companion since the purge began, not fear of death, fear of living with what I have done. This dwelling holds nothing of value. A satchel of seeds for the garden, a broken lightsaber crystal that belonged to my first Padawan, a datapad filled with histories no one will read. Outside, the twin moons cast long shadows across the valley. For 16 years, I have watched those shadows from this ridge, counting days and collecting regrets. 16 years since Order 66, since the betrayal. Since I fled while my brothers and sisters were cut down across the galaxy. The locals leave offerings sometimes, small carved tokens, bundles of herbs, silent acknowledgements of the hermit who occasionally heals their children or predicts the coming storms. They do not know what I was, what I am. They simply sense something different. The older ones remember stories of the Jedi, whispered legends of peacekeepers with laser swords. The children know nothing but the Empire. They were born into subjugation, have never tasted true freedom. Sometimes I catch them watching from the trees. Curiosity without context. To them, I am just a strange old man. My hands are not what they were. Skin pulled tight over bone. Veins prominent like rivers on ancient maps. These hands once commanded battalions, guided younglings through their first meditation, wielded a blade that sang with the pure note of Kyber. Now they struggle to lift a watering can. Time claims everything eventually, even those who commune with the cosmic force. The lightsaber rests on the table. I assembled it the day after I arrived on Seradar. A new crystal, a new beginning. I have drawn it only twice since then, once to defend a village from raiders, once to remind myself that I still could. That despite everything, some part of the Jedi remains in me, the weapon of a more civilized age. How naive we were. Civilization was always a veneer. The Republic proved that. The Clone Wars proved that. The Empire simply stripped away pretense. I recognize the particular engine whine of an Imperial landspeeder approaching. They have found my trail from the settlement, methodical, efficient, just as we taught them to be. I will not run again. The Force has guided me to this moment, to this confrontation. I understand now why I was spared, why I have lingered here at the edge of our own space. There is one final purpose to serve, one last student to face, one final lesson to impart. My name is Ren Dalen. I was a Jedi Master. This is my testimony. The last record of a dead religion, the final confession of a failed teacher. When the Empire writes their history, I will be forgotten, as I should be. But the Force remembers everything. And through the Force, perhaps something of what we were will endure. Not our failures, not our hubris, but the light we once carried. I see the red glow through the trees, the methodical sweep of troops securing the perimeter, and behind them, a presence dark and familiar. My former Padawan approaches, carrying the hatred I helped plant. This is where my legend ends. Not with glory, not with triumph, but with understanding, the true burden of a Jedi Master. I once stood before the Council and accepted the title of Master with pride. Now I understand what mastery truly requires: to face your creation, to witness your mistakes given form, to accept the consequences of your teachings. I can sense them drawing closer. Red blades humming in the night. Stormtroopers with orders to secure and contain. They believe they hunt a dangerous fugitive. They do not understand what waits for them. Not a legend, just an old man ready for rest. The forest has gone silent, no night creatures calling, no wind through leaves. The Force itself holds its breath. I step outside to meet my fate. This is not surrender. This is completion, a circle closing. The legendary life of a Jedi Master ends not with lightsabers raised in victory, but with acceptance. The true mark of wisdom that came too late. They made legends of us. Statues in the Senate Plaza, hollow recordings for Republic citizens to marvel at. Master Dalen, hero of the Outer Rim sieges. Master Dalen, who held the line at Felucia. The Clone Wars transformed us from peacekeepers into generals overnight. We adopted military titles without question, accepted clone armies without understanding what they truly were. Sentient beings created for one purpose. Disposable, expendable, not unlike the Jedi, in the end. I remember the first time I led troops into battle, the 327th Star Corps, men with identical faces but distinct spirits in the Force. They called me General, not Master. The distinction felt important somehow, a subtle shift that should have warned us. My commander was CT-9584. Jax, he called himself. I sensed his apprehension that first deployment, not fear of the enemy, fear of disappointing his Jedi. They were conditioned to revere us, to follow without question. We never asked who placed that conditioning, never questioned our convenient army. The battle was on Mimban. Separatist forces had taken control of Republic mining operations, strategic resources needed for the war effort. We told ourselves these justifications made sense, that securing Tibanna gas reserves and hyperfuel refineries served the greater good. The troops moved with precision, synchronized advance through mud and rain. I deflected blaster fire while they secured positions. 342 droids destroyed, 78 clone troopers lost. I remember the exact numbers. Each life snuffed out registered in the Force. Small lights extinguished one after another. Afterward, standing amid smoke and bodies, Commander Jax approached with the after-action report. Casualties within acceptable parameters, strategic objectives secured. His armor caked with mud and spattered with blood, some his brother's, some his own. There was no triumph in his eyes, no glory, only the hollow satisfaction of completing the mission. I should have recognized the look. It would become familiar in my own reflection soon enough. That night in my quarters, I composed messages to the families of fallen Jedi. 5 nights lost in coordinated operations across the sector. For the clones, no messages were sent, no families waited for news. They existed outside normal structures of connection. Created to serve and die, I meditated until dawn, troubled by questions I could not articulate. The Force offered no clarity, only the constant pressure of war, the spreading darkness that clouded everything. We moved from system to system, liberation they called it. Occupation felt more accurate. The Republic banner raised over worlds that had no choice but to accept our protection. The clone troopers followed orders without question. I began to learn their small acts of individuality, painted marks on armor, tattoos hidden beneath regulation uniforms, names chosen instead of designations, tiny rebellions against their predetermined fate. I understood them better than my fellow Jedi. We were both weapons aimed by unseen hands. The years blended together, battle after battle, world after world. The Jedi Council transmitted new objectives with each victory. Master Yoda spoke of patience. Master Windu spoke of vigilance. Neither spoke of what we were becoming, soldiers rather than diplomats, commanders rather than counselors. The Force grew more turbulent, harder to read. Visions came fractured and incomplete, warnings without context. I took my first Padawan midway through the second year of conflict. Essek Maro, a human boy, 14 standard years old, skilled with a lightsaber, strong in telekinesis. He watched me lead clone troopers with wide eyes, absorbing lessons I did not realize I was teaching. The Council said continuing the traditions of training was essential, that the Jedi must prepare the next generation even as war consumed the current one. Now I understand we were simply creating replacements, preparing sacrifices for the pyre. Essek stood at my side during the battle for Cato Nemoidia, his blue blade moving in perfect synchronization with mine. We had practiced the forms for months, Soresu to defend, Ataru to attack. The clone troopers advanced behind our protection. The boy learned quickly, too quickly. By the time we secured the clone bridge cities, he had recorded 37 kills in his mental tally. I felt his satisfaction through our training bond, his pride in efficiency, values of a soldier, not a Jedi. I had taught him well. At night in our forward operating base, I found him practicing with clone troopers, not lightsaber forms, but hand-to-hand combat techniques. Close quarters battle maneuvers. The men had adopted him as a mascot of sorts, their little commander. They did not see what I saw, the hardening in his eyes, the calculations behind each movement. I had wanted to protect him from what we had become. Instead, I accelerated his transformation. When the dreams began, I dismissed them as battle fatigue. The same visions haunted many Jedi during those years. Temples burning, younglings scattered, a shadow rising with mechanical breath. The Council advised meditation, deeper communion with the Force. But the Force itself seemed wounded, corrupted by what we were doing in its name. Protection had become control, defense had become dominance. The light we claimed to serve had become conditional, applied only where Republic interests aligned. Commander Jax found me on the observation deck one night, staring out at the vastness of space. 3 years into the war, the 327th had been reduced to 60% strength despite regular reinforcements. New clones arrived, identical faces, diminished presence in the Force, mass-produced like the droids they fought. He stood at attention, helmet tucked under his arm. A scar ran from temple to jaw, courtesy of a Geonosian sonic cannon. His eyes held the same question that haunted me. How much longer? Not when would the war end. When would we end? You needed context to understand what was happening to us, to the Republic, to the Jedi, to the galaxy itself. This confession is not an absolution. There is no forgiveness for what followed, only truth. Naked and unadorned, we were blind, willfully blind. And in that blindness, we paved the way for our own destruction. The legendary Jedi, guardians of peace and justice. We never saw the enemy standing in our own reflection. The first sign of what we would become appeared during the liberation of Onderon. My battalion deployed alongside Master Kenobi's forces. Separatist occupation had lasted 3 standard years. The population welcomed us as saviors, threw flowers as our transports landed in the Capitol Plaza. Children reached out to touch lightsabers. Women wept in relief. Men stood straighter, pride restored. A textbook operation. Republic propaganda would broadcast footage across friendly systems, evidence of our benevolence, our righteousness. 3 days later, we discovered the resistance cells, not fighting separatists, fighting us. Republic intelligence identified 7 key leaders, former planetary officials who questioned our authority. The occupation had ended, they argued. Why did Republic forces remain? Why were resources still being redirected to military objectives? Valid questions, reasonable concerns. Officially designated as sedition, the Jedi Council transmitted specific instructions, minimal involvement. This was a political matter, not a force issue. Clone intelligence would handle the situation. Commander Jax received orders directly from Coruscant. I was not included in the briefings. Unusual protocol, but we were stretched thin across multiple fronts. I did not question the arrangement. The first compromise is always the easiest, the most justifiable. 4 days later, the resistance leaders were arrested, charges of conspiracy, undermining planetary security, evidence provided by anonymous sources. Trials would be held on Coruscant, away from sympathetic local populations. Standard procedure for sensitive cases. Everything according to Republic law, everything neat and orderly. Justice would be served. That night, Essek found me in my temporary quarters reviewing battle plans. My Padawan had grown tall in the 3 years under my tutelage. The roundness of childhood gone from his face, eyes that had seen too much, hands that had taken lives. He stood at attention, a habit adopted from the clones, asked permission to speak freely. Another military affectation. I granted it without looking up from the datapad, expected questions about our next deployment. Strategic analysis. He had become quite adept at identifying tactical advantages. The resistance leaders never reached the transport, he said. Clone intelligence units had executed them in their cells. Standard counterinsurgency protocol. Message sent to potential dissidents. Republic security maintained. Commander Jax had authorized the operation based on Coruscant directives. The bodies were being processed for disposal. No public statement would be issued. Families would be informed of transport accidents. Cleaner that way. I stared at my apprentice, searched his face for outrage, for concern, for any reaction appropriate to what he described. Found nothing but calm acceptance, the same expression he wore when reporting droids neutralized or objectives secured. He awaited my response, my approval perhaps, or my next order. I dismissed him without comment, sat in silence long after he departed. The Force offered no guidance, no clarity, just the persistent shadow that had become the background of my existence. In my report to the Council, I omitted the executions. Noted only that the situation had been resolved according to Republic security protocols. No questions were asked, no clarification requested. The response came within hours. New deployment orders, another world, another battle. The machine of war rolled forward, consuming everything in its path, including our principles, including our purpose. Essek grew more efficient with each engagement, more detached. His combat skills advanced beyond standard Padawan levels. The clone troopers respected his tactical insight, followed his suggestions without waiting for my confirmation. He spent off-duty hours in their company rather than meditating or studying Jedi teachings. I observed the distance growing between what we were meant to be and what we had become, said nothing, did nothing, continued leading men to their deaths in service to a republic that increasingly resembled its enemy. 6 months later, on Kashyyyk, I received orders to return to Coruscant, temporary recall. The Council required my presence for a sensitive matter. Commander Jax would maintain operations in my absence. Essek would continue his training under Master Luminara, temporarily deployed to our sector. Standard rotation. Nothing to indicate what waited for me in the capital. Nothing to prepare me for what I would find. The temple felt different upon my return. Quieter, emptier. Most Jedi were scattered across the galaxy, leading clone armies against an enemy that never diminished despite our victories. Younglings still trained in the lower levels, their laughter echoing through hallways designed for hundreds more. Artifacts gathered dust in chambers rarely visited. The heart of our order beat slower, weaker. 5 years of war had drained our strength more effectively than any Sith could have managed. Master Windu met me in the Chamber of Reflection, not the council room, a private audience then. His face had aged beyond the passing years, deep lines carved around eyes that had seen too much. the legendary master of Varpad, creator of a form that channeled darkness without succumbing to it. Or so we believed. He spoke without preamble, direct as always. The council had concerns about my Padawan. Reports indicated unusual aptitude for aggressive tactics. Commendations from clone commanders noted his effectiveness in neutralizing enemy combatants. His training bond showed signs of abnormal development. Questions about his suitability for knighthood had been raised. Evaluations would be required before he could progress further. Standard procedure, nothing to be concerned about. I listened without interruption, heard the words beneath the words. The council questioned whether Essek was turning to the dark side, whether his immersion in warfare had corrupted his connection to the Force. Valid concerns, appropriate vigilance, yet something in Master Windu's tone suggested deeper currents. I asked if other Padawans had triggered similar reviews, if the war had affected the development of young Jedi across the Order. The question hung between us, unspoken implications heavy in the air. Some adaptations were expected, he replied. Necessary adjustments to extraordinary circumstances. The Jedi had always evolved to meet the challenges of their time. But balance must be maintained. The boundary between necessary action and corruption could blur during prolonged conflict. The Council monitored all Jedi for signs of darkness, especially the young, the impressionable, those without the foundation of peacetime training. Like Essek, like so many others, I did not ask who monitored the Council, who ensured that the Guardians themselves remained uncorrupted. The question formed and died unspoken. Perhaps that silence was my greatest failure. The moment I might have changed something, might have sparked a conversation that could have altered our course. Instead, I accepted my instructions, agreed to evaluate my Padawan upon my return to the front, to watch for signs of darkness, as if darkness were something external, something that infected from outside rather than grew from within. Before departing, I visited the archives, sought perspective in ancient texts, precedents for what we were experiencing. The archivist, Jocasta Nu, watched with knowing eyes as I accessed histories of previous conflicts. The Mandalorian Wars, the Sith Wars, times when Jedi had commanded armies, led Republic forces against existential threats. There were patterns there, warnings unheeded across millennia, the same mistakes repeated with the same consequences. But, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of generations, I could not see what was directly before me. The blindness of certainty, the arrogance of righteousness, the corruption of power wrapped in benevolent intent. I returned to Kashyyyk with renewed determination, to save my Padawan not just from external darkness, but from what we had become together. Too late, of course. Far too late. The seeds had been planted years earlier, with every order given, every battle fought, every compromise justified by necessity. The legendary Jedi Master, so concerned with distant threats that he never recognized the corruption within his own heart, within the heart of the Order itself. 6 months later, everything ended. Order 66, the Purge, the Fall. But the Jedi had ceased to exist long before the clones turned their weapons against us. We died the moment we became generals instead of peacekeepers. The moment we accepted armies without questioning their source. The moment we placed Republic victory above Jedi principles. Palpatine did not destroy the Jedi. He merely formalized what we had already accomplished ourselves. I felt it happen. Kashyyyk operations were proceeding according to plan. Wookiee resistance fighters coordinating with clone forces to push back separatist battle droids. Essek leading a flanking maneuver through dense jungle. Commander Jax at my side, reviewing holographic terrain maps. The pain struck without warning, thousands of voices crying out through the Force, sudden silence where constant communication had existed for my entire life. The emptiness that followed was worse than the pain, a void where the Jedi Order had existed in my consciousness. Commander Jax received the transmission moments later. His posture shifted subtly, hand moving casually toward his blaster. Words about a Jedi rebellion, verified reports of assassination attempts against Chancellor Palpatine, Order 66 authorized across all battalions, termination protocols effective immediately. His voice remained professional, neutral, as if reciting weather conditions or supply inventories. Perhaps there was regret buried beneath conditioning. Perhaps not. I never had the chance to ask. The Force provided warning enough. I disarmed him with a gesture, telekinetic pull wrenching the blaster from his grip before his finger found the trigger. The action bought seconds, nothing more. Clone troopers converging from multiple directions, men who had fought beside me for years, shared rations, tended wounds, followed orders without question. Now they had new orders. The ultimate contingency built into their creation, their true purpose revealed. I did not want to kill them. Even as blaster fire erupted around me, I sought non-lethal options. Force pushes to create distance, telekinetic barriers to deflect shots. The lightsaber remained unignited at my belt until the first casualties became inevitable. Not clone troopers. Wookiee allies caught in the crossfire, confused by the sudden shift in allegiances, loyal to the Jedi who had helped liberate their world. Their deaths demanded response. Defense became offense. Green blade humming to life. Muscle memory taking control where conscious thought faltered. The engagement lasted 3 minutes and 27 seconds. 17 clone troopers dead. 4 wounded severely enough to prevent pursuit. Commander Jax unconscious but breathing. I could have killed him. Should have, perhaps. Another failure to add to the accounting. Instead, I ran. Used the confusion to reach our shuttle. Automated launch protocols overridden with emergency codes. Atmosphere braking maneuvers executed while removing tracking devices. Hyperspace calculations performed with mechanical precision despite the chaos in my mind. The pain of severed bonds resonated through the Force, masters and knights falling across the galaxy. Younglings hunted through temple corridors, betrayal multiplied thousands of times over. Through it all, one particular absence registered with horrifying clarity. Essek, my Padawan, his presence in the Force vanished not with the shock of death, but with the cold withdrawal of choice. The training bond between us severed not by external force, but by internal decision. He had chosen a side, not mine, not ours, something else entirely. The hyperspace journey provided time for assessment, calculations of survival, strategizing next moves while the galaxy transformed around me. The holonet blazed with reports of Jedi treachery, evidence of corruption, secret plots against the Republic, images of Master Windu portrayed as an assassin, Master Yoda labeled a dangerous fugitive, footage of clone troopers securing Jedi temples across multiple worlds, protecting citizens from religious zealots who had attempted to overthrow the legitimate government. The narrative constructed with meticulous care, seeds planted long before harvest. I avoided established hyperspace lanes, plotted multiple short jumps through obscure routes, changed vessels at abandoned outposts, discarded recognizable Jedi robes for civilian attire, cut the Padawan braid I had worn for decades. External transformation reflecting internal reality. I was no longer Master Dalen. That man had died on Kashyyyk alongside the Republic he served. The person who emerged was someone new, someone without legend or purpose, a survivor without cause, a relic before my time. Rumors found me despite precautions. Chancellor Palpatine declaring himself Emperor. The Republic reorganized into the First Galactic Empire. For security, for stability, addressing the weaknesses that had allowed corruption to flourish. Crowds cheering in the Senate Plaza, representatives voting away liberty with thunderous applause. The machinery of democracy dismantled by its own components, and through it all, the systematic hunting of remaining Jedi. Bounties offered, citizenship rewards for information leading to capture, the Guardians recast as enemies of peace. Most disturbing were reports of the Inquisitorius, a new order of Force wielders serving Imperial interests. Hunters specialized in tracking Jedi fugitives. Former knights and Padawans turned to the dark side. Broken, then rebuilt as weapons. Their lightsabers modified with circular hilts. red blades signifying their allegiance, their corruption, and among them, whispers of a young human male, exceptionally skilled in tracking Force signatures, particularly effective at infiltrating communities where Jedi might hide, known for extracting information through methodical application of pain, designated as the Sixth Brother, bearing a facial scar identical to one Essek had received during the Battle of Cato Nemoidia. I wandered the Outer Rim for 2 years, changed identities with each new world, worked as mechanic, freighter crew, agricultural laborer, medic in remote communities where questions went unasked. The Force remained my companion, though I avoided obvious use. No lightsaber practice, no telekinesis, no mind influence, just enough connection to sense danger approaching, to feel the continued diminishment of light across the galaxy as more Jedi fell to Imperial hunters, to register each death as confirmation of failure, not just my personal failure, the failure of everything we had claimed to represent. The guilt became a physical presence, a constant weight pressing against chest and consciousness, not simply survivor guilt, though that existed in abundance, deeper recognition of complicity. We had created the conditions for our own destruction, accepted military authority without questioning its source, compromised principles for tactical advantage, trained children to become weapons, called it necessity, called it duty, never recognizing that each step led precisely where we now found ourselves, not victims of external betrayal, but architects of internal corruption. 16 years ago, I found Seradar, remote agricultural world, minimal imperial, presence focused on resource extraction rather than population control, small settlements scattered across temperate highlands, self-sufficient communities with limited connection to galactic politics, people concerned with seasonal rotations rather than imperial edicts, a place to disappear, to fade into obscurity, to die quietly when the time came. The Force guided me here for reasons I did not understand then. Only now, with the Imperial shuttle breaking atmosphere, do I comprehend the final purpose. I built this dwelling with local materials. Stone foundation, timber walls, simple construction using traditional methods rather than modern technology, less detectable, more connected to the planet itself. Established gardens producing vegetables and herbs. Medicinal plants cultivated from indigenous species. A life stripped to essentials. Meditation without formal practice. Connection without dogma. Survival without purpose beyond the next day, the next season, the next year stretching into emptiness. The locals approached cautiously at first, suspicious of outsiders as isolated communities often are. Practical concerns rather than political allegiance. I offered what I could. Medical knowledge without back-to-tanks or modern scanners. Agricultural insights informed by thousands of worlds visited during my former life. Weather predictions guided by subtle Force attunement to atmospheric conditions. Gradually, suspicion transformed into cautious acceptance. The strange hermit became a community resource. Not friend, not truly neighbor, but tolerated. Sometimes even sought out for counsel. I maintained awareness of Imperial movements through casual conversation, supply shipments delayed, new garrisons established on nearby worlds, increased ore quotas from Seradar mines. Resource extraction accelerated as the Empire consolidated power, built fleets, expanded reach. The machine constructed from Republic remnants grew larger, more efficient, more oppressive, the tendrils of control extending further into Outer Rim territories previously ignored. It was inevitable they would eventually reach this insignificant world. Inevitable they would find the last Jedi hiding among farmers and simple traders. Perhaps I could have run again, sensed the danger approaching through the Force, disappeared before Imperial forces pinpointed my location, found another remote world, another temporary sanctuary. Continued the pattern of flight established after Order 66. The thought occurred as scout ships began routine sweeps of outlying settlements. Standard Imperial expansion protocol, resource assessment combined with security evaluation, efficient, dual-purpose operations characteristic of the new order. I considered options, prepared contingencies, gathered essential supplies. Then I felt the presence, distant at first. A cold pressure through the Force, familiar despite the years, despite the darkness now wrapped around what had once been light. My Padawan, my student, my failure given form and function. The sixth brother had found my trail. The Force itself had guided him here, not random chance, not routine Imperial operations, specific purpose. The completion of what began on Kashyyyk 16 years earlier, the confrontation I had been avoiding across time and space. So I stayed, disbanded preparations for departure, settled deeper into daily routines, tended gardens with meticulous care, assisted neighbors with harvest preparations, repaired the eastern wall of my dwelling where weather had weakened timber joints. Ordinary actions filling days while the noose tightened, Imperial presence increasing in nearby settlements, questions about the hermit living in the highlands, casual inquiries with calculated purpose. The web drawing closer around prey that no longer wished to escape. The decision brought unexpected peace, the release of accepting what had always been inevitable. My path had led here by design rather than accident. Not my design, not Imperial design, the Force itself creating patterns beyond mortal comprehension. The legendary Jedi Master would meet his destiny not in glorious battle, but in quiet acceptance. Not with lightsaber raised against countless enemies, but with open hands extended toward a single failure. My student, my creation, himself a victim of what we became together during those war years, the circle completing with elegant symmetry. Last night, I dreamt of the temple as it was before the Clone Wars. Corridors filled with knights and masters moving with serene purpose. Youngling laughter echoing through training rooms, the archives illuminated with the soft glow of holographic texts. The room of 1,000 fountains providing perfect harmony of sound and sensation, not as it actually existed. An idealized memory, a myth we created about ourselves. Perhaps that was our greatest failure, believing our own legends, confusing symbol with substance, mistaking ceremony for meaning. The dream dissolved with the first light of dawn, reality reasserting itself with cruel clarity. Now I prepare for what comes. Not as a Jedi Master, not as a legend, simply as a man who has lived long enough to understand his mistakes, to face their consequences with open eyes. The Imperial shuttle has landed near the settlement, stormtroopers deploying in standard search formation, and with them, a presence cold and focused, methodical in his hunt, relentless in his purpose. My former Padawan comes to complete what began with Order 66, to extinguish one of the last embers of the Jedi Order, to confront the Master who failed him, who failed everyone. I have left this recording hidden where it might someday be found, not to preserve my legend, that deserves to die with me, but to preserve truth, context for what we were, what we became, what we might have been under different circumstances. Perhaps someday, when the Empire has passed into history as all regimes eventually do, someone will find value in these words. Understanding rather than veneration, recognition of how easily principle becomes corrupted when wrapped in righteousness, how quickly guardians become conquerors when fear replaces wisdom. The Force remains, beyond Jedi, beyond Sith, beyond Empire, the constant that connects all living things. Perhaps it will guide others to better outcomes than we achieved. Perhaps new guardians will arise without our flaws, our blindness, our arrogance, or perhaps the cycle will simply continue, different actors performing the same tragedy across new generations. The legendary life of a Jedi Master concludes not with final wisdom, but with humble uncertainty. The only truth I can offer with absolute conviction: they are coming up the path now. Red blade humming in the darkness, the sound carries memories of a blue blade wielded by younger hands. Training sessions in temple courtyards, patient corrections of form and stance. The student has surpassed the Master in exactly the way I feared, exactly the way I enabled. I step outside to meet him, no lightsaber in hand, no defensive posture, simply open palms and open eyes. The final confrontation between master and apprentice, between past and present, between legend and truth. The Force will witness what follows. That is enough. My first memory was light. Not metaphorical illumination, but actual radiance filtering through high windows in the Jedi Temple nursery. Geometric patterns cast across polished stone floors. The gentle hum of Coruscant traffic beyond thick walls. Sensory impressions preserved with perfect clarity despite the passage of 70 standard years. Most beings lose early memories to the erosion of time. Jedi retain them through meditation techniques, blessing or curse depending on perspective, to carry the weight of complete remembrance across decades, to never fully escape what you have been. The Kresh Masters moved with quiet efficiency, tending to Force-sensitive infants gathered from across the galaxy. Children surrendered by parents who believed in the Jedi purpose, who trusted strangers to raise their offspring in service to higher ideals. I never knew my birth family, never sought information despite access to temple records. Complete severance of original identity was encouraged. Dedication to the Order above all other connections. The first step toward detachment. Toward becoming something beyond ordinary attachment, something greater, something less. I excelled at expected milestones, Force sensitivity manifesting early through telekinetic aptitude. Small objects responding to concentrated focus, toys hovering above cribs, training remotes following mental commands rather than programmed patterns. The Masters noted progress with clinical approval. Potential identified and catalogued, development tracked against established parameters, everything measured, everything quantified, science wrapped in spiritual trappings. The machinery of Jedi creation operating with precision honed across millennia, childhood passed in structured increments, academic instruction alternating with physical training, Force techniques introduced according to developmental readiness. Lightsaber forms practiced first with training sticks, then low-power training sabers, community reinforced through shared meals and meditation sessions, independence systematically pruned to encourage interdependence. Not family in the conventional sense. Something simultaneously more inclusive and more restrictive, belonging conditioned on conformity, acceptance predicated on adherence to the code. I remember the day I was selected as Padawan, 10 standard years old, standing in the exhibition hall with other initiates, each demonstrating skills for visiting knights and masters seeking apprentices. The pressure of potential rejection heavy in the room. Those not chosen would be reassigned to Jedi Service Corps, honorable work but distinctly lesser status. The unspoken hierarchy that contradicted our supposed equality. Master Kyvan Spellick approached after my demonstration of Form 3 defensive sequences, tall Arcanian, with white eyes and flowing silver hair, reputation for scholarship and diplomatic resolution. His hand on my shoulder felt like salvation, like purpose confirmed. The relief of selection shames me now. The desperation to belong, to advance, to become what others defined as success. Training under Master Spellick shaped my understanding of the Jedi role. Diplomatic missions rather than conflict resolution. Mediation between disputing factions. Careful application of influence rather than open displays of power. Lightsaber practice maintained, but emphasized as last resort rather than primary tool. History and philosophy featured prominently in daily lessons. Context for our actions, perspective beyond immediate objectives, the cultivation of patience as fundamental practice. 16 years as his Padawan before facing the trials, longer than standard apprenticeship, not due to inadequacy but specialized diplomatic focus. Master Spellick believed proper formation required extended mentorship. The Council approved exceptions for promising candidates, another mark of the hierarchy we pretended did not exist. Privilege wrapped in justification of potential. The seeds of exceptionalism planted early, cultivated through preferential treatment, disguised as personalized development. The trials themselves remain vivid despite subsequent decades. Tests of skill and character designed to prove readiness for knighthood, combat proficiency assessed through dueling protocols. Wisdom evaluated through ethical scenarios without clear resolution. Courage measured by confronting personalized fear manifestations. I passed with distinction noted in council records. Master Spellick presented the ceremonial braid severing with appropriate solemnity. Fellow Jedi offering congratulations with restrained enthusiasm appropriate to the occasion. Achievement acknowledged without fostering pride. Accomplishment recognized without encouraging attachment to status. The constant balance maintained between validation and detachment, the psychological tightrope walked by all who followed the Jedi path. Knight Dalen built reputation through diplomatic successes. Border disputes resolved without bloodshed. Trade negotiations concluded to mutual satisfaction. Planetary conflicts diffused before escalation. The Council assigned increasingly sensitive missions based on demonstrated competence, noted ability to navigate complex political landscapes without triggering resistance, to influence without apparent manipulation, to achieve Republic objectives while maintaining appearance of neutrality, skills that would later transfer seamlessly to military command. The diplomat becoming the general through natural progression rather than conscious transformation. Corruption proceeding through logical increments rather than dramatic turns. The first assassination attempt occurred during negotiations on Anshan. Separatist sympathizers targeting Republic representatives, poison introduced through ventilation systems, detection through force sensitivity rather than security protocols, neutralization requiring physical intervention rather than diplomatic resolution. 3 attackers killed during the engagement, the first lives taken directly by my hand rather than through secondary action. The Council commendation that followed implied unspoken transition, from peacekeeper to warrior when circumstances required, the flexibility of Jedi ethics when Republic security demanded adaptation. Another step along the path that led eventually to Seradar, to this moment of final reckoning. Master status came after 22 years as Knight, elevation based on demonstrated wisdom and service record, the ceremony appropriately dignified, ancient words recited in the council chamber, the formal recognition of achievement and responsibility, standing where countless others had stood across generations, accepting the mantle of leadership with appropriate humility, masking inappropriate pride, the sense of arrival, of attainment, the quiet satisfaction that should have triggered warning rather than contentment, the belief in earned position rather than provisional trust, another failure of perspective disguised as accomplishment. What followed were decades of service consistent with established patterns, missions completed, apprentices trained, 4 Padawans guided to knighthood before Essek, each successful according to order standards, each absorbing the subtle contradictions inherent in our teachings, the gap between stated principles and operational realities, the convenient exceptions justified by greater purpose, the compromises rationalized by necessity, each replicating the patterns established by their master, by the order itself, the corruption transmitting through generations with perfect fidelity, unrecognized, uncorrected, unquestioned, the legendary life accumulated through incremental additions, successes recorded in mission reports, achievements acknowledged by council recognition, reputation enhanced through HoloNet accounts of diplomatic resolutions and peacekeeping interventions, Master Dalen becoming known beyond Jedi circles, a symbol of what the Order represented to Republic citizens, wisdom personified, selfless service embodied, the walking confirmation of institutional righteousness, the perfect representative precisely because I believed absolutely in what we claimed to be, conviction without question, service without doubt, the most dangerous combination for any guardian of peace. Then came the Clone Wars, the brutal transition from theory to application, from restraint to necessary action, from peacekeeping to military engagement, the legendary Jedi Master adapting to new requirements with appropriate flexibility, leading clone battalions with natural authority transferred from diplomatic contexts to battlefield commands, the 327th Star Corps responding to orders with precision that reinforced confidence in leadership capacity, Victories accumulated alongside casualties, strategic objectives secured at costs deemed acceptable by distant assessment. Republic interests advanced through coordinated application of overwhelming force, everything justified by existential threat, everything permitted by emergency authorization. The perfect environment for corruption to flourish, unrecognized, unacknowledged, unchallenged. The Imperial transport landed an hour ago. Standard procedure for high-value target acquisition, perimeter established to prevent escape, surveillance confirming occupancy before committing resources to direct engagement. Methodical. Professional. The tactical approach I helped develop during the war, now deployed against former architects. Appropriate irony recognized but irrelevant to present circumstances. The circle completes regardless of appreciation for its symmetry. Stormtroopers move through underbrush with commendable discipline. Not clone troopers, these newer Imperial soldiers, mass recruited rather than genetically engineered, less precisely trained but adequate for most operations, particularly when supported by specialized assets. Like the figure moving at their center, black armor absorbing moonlight, red lightsaber casting bloody illumination across white helmets, the familiar presence in the Force now distorted through darkness, focused, cold, methodical in pursuit of assigned objectives. My former Padawan, my greatest failure. The sixth brother comes to complete unfinished business. I sense his recognition through our dormant training bond. The momentary hesitation as proximity confirms what long-range detection suggested. The master he hunted for 16 years. The betrayer who abandoned him on Kashyyyk, the hypocrite who taught principles then demonstrated their hollowness through action. His hatred pulses through the Force like physical pressure, justified emotion given perspective, understandable response to perceived abandonment, to disillusionment, to the collapse of foundational belief. I accept its validity without resistance. The garden provides final moments of peace before confrontation. Plants cultivated over 16 years, seeds to harvest cycle repeated with seasons. The patience of nurturing growth without controlling development. Simple lessons learned too late for meaningful application beyond personal understanding. Perspective achieved only through complete separation from former identity, from purpose, from legend. The irony of wisdom found only after its utility expired, after the damage was complete, after the opportunity for correction passed beyond recovery, the ultimate failure of a teaching order, learning the wrong lessons until time renders them irrelevant. Stormtroopers establish firing positions with tactical precision, coverage of all potential escape routes, overlapping fields reducing blind spots. Standard Imperial containment protocol for Force-sensitive targets. Assumptions regarding resistance, regarding desperate flight, regarding the legendary Jedi Master who must be neutralized through overwhelming application of coordinated force. They cannot conceive alternative scenarios, different responses to their presence. The possibility of acceptance rather than resistance, the final surrender of legend to truth, to consequence, to completion. The sixth brother approaches alone, confidence in ability, appropriate to demonstrated skill, to reputation built through successful hunting of Jedi fugitives across 16 years, red blade humming with unstable energy characteristic of corrupted kyber crystals, bleeding through forced subjugation, through imposed will rather than harmonic resonance, the physical manifestation of spiritual corruption, of natural connection twisted into unnatural domination. The lightsaber as perfect symbol of what the Empire represents, what it requires from those who serve its purpose. His voice comes distorted through the mask, mechanical filtering creating appropriate distance between human and function, between apprentice and executioner, the familiar cadence still detectable beneath artificial modification. The speech patterns of the boy I trained now serving Imperial declaration, formal announcement of crimes against the Empire, against the Emperor, against galactic stability and security, charges recited with bureaucratic precision, the theater of justice maintained even in obvious execution, form preserved while substance decays. another legacy of Republic transformation rather than Imperial innovation. I make no response to charges. No defense against accurate accusations, no resistance to inevitable conclusion, simply stand with open hands in garden rows, plants reaching maturity after careful cultivation. After patient tending without guarantee of harvest, the sixth brother interprets posture as surrender, as acceptance of overwhelming force, as recognition of futile resistance. Partial accuracy within misinterpretation. Surrender not to imperial authority but to consequence, to responsibility, to the completion of what began decades earlier with the first compromise. The first justification. The first exception granted for greater purpose. The origin point impossible to identify precisely. The corruption proceeding through such incremental progression that detection required perspective possible only from terminal position. He orders stormtroopers to secure the perimeter, to maintain positions while he completes the primary objective personally. Protocol deviation suggesting emotional involvement despite conditioning against such weakness. The need for personal confrontation overriding tactical optimization. The apprentice requiring direct engagement with former master. Closure demanded by psychological factors superseding operational efficiency. Human remnants persisting, despite systematic suppression, despite reconditioning, despite years serving darkness rather than light. We stand 3 meters apart. Master and apprentice reunited after 16 years separation. After parallel journeys through distinctly different landscapes reaching ironically similar destinations, both serving purposes divergent from original intent, both corrupted through incremental compromise, both arriving at final convergence through paths neither would have consciously chosen at origin point, the force connecting what circumstance separated, completing the circle with elegant precision, transcending mortal comprehension, beyond Jedi, beyond Sith, beyond Empire. The cosmic pattern asserting fundamental balance through apparent chaos. The mask comes off with deliberate gesture, revealed face familiar despite intervening years, despite the scar running from temple to jaw, despite coldness replacing animation, despite darkness replacing light. Esek Maro stares with eyes that reflect starlight without warmth, without recognition beyond tactical identification. The boy I trained, submerged beneath imperial conditioning, beneath necessary adaptation to survival requirements, beneath the armor constructed against vulnerability, against connection, against everything the Jedi claim to represent while systematically undermining through contradictory action. Words emerge without mechanical filtering, his natural voice preserved despite everything else sacrificed to imperial service, to survival, to transformation from victim to executioner, questions rather than declarations, demands for explanation, for justification, for some framework that provides meaning to shared history, to betrayal, to abandonment, to the legendary Jedi Master who taught principles then demonstrated their hollowness through action, through example, through the final lesson of hypocrisy revealed through crisis response, the most honest teaching provided through unconscious demonstration, rather than conscious instruction. "Why did you run?" he asks with genuine confusion beneath cold exterior. "Why did you leave us on Kashyyyk? Why did the great Master Dalen abandon his troops, his Padawan, his sacred duty?" The question's legitimate, regardless of source, regardless of subsequent paths taken by questioner, regardless of present circumstances rendering answers relevant only as historical context rather than practical guidance. Academic closure rather than actionable intelligence. The final record completed before archival deletion, before purposeful erasure of inconvenient truth contradicting official narrative. I offer no defense, no justification, simply acknowledgement of validity, of earned recrimination, of responsibility accepted without qualification. The questions deserve answers stripped of self-preservation, of rationalization, of the reflexive self-defense that characterized the order throughout its existence. That prevented recognition of corruption until manifestation rendered diagnosis irrelevant. until treatment options expired through terminal progression, until nothing remained but acceptance of consequence, of responsibility, of the legendary life reaching appropriate conclusion through confrontation with its fundamental hollowness. The sixth brother processes response with visible confusion, expected resistance absent from engagement, anticipated denial replaced by confirmation, the interrogation protocol disrupted by unexpected cooperation, by acceptance rendering coercion unnecessary, by surrender more complete than tactical capitulation. The surrender of narrative itself, of justification, of the fundamental self-deception required for participation in corrupt systems regardless of specific role within operational hierarchy. The voluntary relinquishment of the final protection against confronting personal responsibility. The legend itself dissolved through honest assessment. I see understanding register gradually, the realization that his former master offers no resistance not from physical weakness but from spiritual acceptance, from recognition more complete than imperial conditioning could produce through application of pain, through systematic destruction of identity, through forced reconstruction serving external purpose. The organic comprehension arising from internal processing rather than external imposition. The fundamental difference between education and indoctrination illustrated through present contrast, through parallel journeys reaching superficially similar destinations through distinctly different mechanisms. Voluntary acceptance versus compelled compliance. His lightsaber lowers fractionally, unconscious response to unexpected development, to engagement proceeding outside anticipated parameters, outside established protocols for Jedi acquisition, for execution of Order enemies, for completion of assigned objectives according to Imperial methodology. Confusion creating momentary opportunity for connection beyond present context, beyond immediate circumstance, beyond the artificial separation created through Order 66, through subsequent years of divergent experience, through the systematic dismantling of former bonds replaced by Imperial loyalty constructed through precision application of pain and conditioning. I offer what he truly seeks, not resistance justifying execution, not denial confirming corruption, not the legendary Jedi Master whose elimination would enhance inquisitorious standing within Imperial hierarchy. Simple truth without qualification, without self-protective filtering, without the instinctive self-deception that prevented recognition of corruption until manifestation rendered diagnosis irrelevant. The acknowledgement of failure without expectation of forgiveness, without hope of redemption, without any objective beyond completion of the circle through honest accounting before inevitable conclusion. The Jedi failed. I failed. The corruption began not with Palpatine, but within the Order itself, within the contradictions we maintained through elaborate justification, through willing blindness, through the arrogance of righteousness that prevented recognition of incremental compromise, that enabled participation in corrupt systems while maintaining illusion of separation, of superiority, of fundamental difference between our actions and those we condemned in others. The legendary Jedi Master acknowledging what should have been recognized decades earlier, what might have prevented present reality had acceptance preceded manifestation rather than following inevitable consequence. Something shifts in his expression. Recognition beyond tactical assessment, connection beyond present circumstance, memory penetrating conditioning with momentary clarity. The boy I trained briefly visible beneath Imperial reconstruction, beneath systematic suppression of original identity. The apprentice who asked questions during lightsaber practice, who challenged assumptions during philosophical instruction, who demonstrated independence inappropriate to Jedi uniformity, who reflected the contradictions inherent in our teachings through unconscious mirroring rather than conscious resistance. The natural response to exposure to institutional hypocrisy manifesting through behavioral adaptation rather than verbal articulation, the moment passes quickly. Vulnerability suppressed through trained response, through conditioned rejection of connection threatening operational effectiveness, through the survival mechanism constructed through systematic application of pain associated with specific emotional states. with memories, with identity elements dangerous to imperial purpose, to assigned function within established hierarchy. The sixth brother reasserting dominance over Essek Maro through deliberate reimposition of operational parameters, of mission objectives, of the fundamental separation between present and past essential for execution of assigned tasks without psychological complication. The red blade raises with renewed purpose, with clarity following momentary confusion, with the determination characteristic of imperial methodology, of objectives pursued without qualification, without ethical hesitation, without the paralyzing complexity of considering multiple perspectives, the simplicity of authorized action without burden of personal responsibility, the efficiency of execution without requirement for justification beyond hierarchical authorization, the perfect expression of imperial function purified through elimination of complicating factors, of individual consideration, of the fundamental humanity sacrificed to operational optimization. I make no move toward the lightsaber resting on nearby stone. Make no attempt to summon the weapon through force connection maintained despite years of minimal use, despite deliberate suppression of obvious application, despite the legendary Jedi Master becoming the anonymous hermit through systematic elimination of identifying characteristics, of behaviors associated with former identity. The final confrontation requires no theatrical demonstration of retained skill, no symbolic resistance justifying execution, no reinforcement of the narrative constructed around Jedi threat requiring proportional response. Simply acceptance of consequence, of responsibility, of the completion inherent in present convergence. His confusion returns briefly, the conditioning disrupted by unexpected response, by engagement proceeding outside anticipated parameters, by the target behaving inconsistently with established profile derived from historical record, from mission briefing, from the tactical assessment based on reputation rather than present reality. The legendary Jedi Master replaced by the anonymous hermit, accepting consequence without resistance, without the expected defense of identity, of principle, of the fundamental narrative justifying continued existence, despite overwhelming evidence of institutional failure, of personal responsibility for participation in corrupt systems regardless of specific intentions. Stormtroopers maintain perimeter positions with professional discipline, with focused attention appropriate to mission classification, to target designation, to the operational parameters established through tactical assessment, through intelligence evaluation, through the systematic application of imperial methodology to objective acquisition, the breathing cadence audible through helmet filtration systems, the slight rustle of armor with minor position adjustments, the environmental sounds registering with heightened clarity characteristic of final moments, of awareness expanded through proximity to conclusion, through the imminent transition from present experience to whatever follows mortal existence. The sixth brother makes decision with visible resolution, with commitment appropriate to assigned function within imperial hierarchy, to the operational requirements associated with inquisitorious designation, with the specific objectives authorizing deployment to remote agricultural world for acquisition of high-value target, for elimination of potential threat to imperial stability, to the narrative constructed around legitimate authority established through necessary response to Jedi corruption, to separatist insurgency, to the fundamental challenge to order represented by competing power structures regardless of specific ideological framework. The blade descends with precision, with economy of movement characteristic of trained execution, of operational efficiency prioritized above theatrical demonstration, above unnecessary elaboration, above the fundamental humanity sacrificed to functional optimization. The legendary Jedi Master makes no attempt to avoid termination, to resist inevitable conclusion, to perpetuate existence beyond appropriate completion point, beyond the natural termination of the circle begun decades earlier with first acceptance of compromised purpose, with first participation in corrupt systems justified through rationalization of greater good, with first surrender of principle to necessity establishing pattern replicated with increasing frequency until exception became standard, until corruption became normal, until recognition became impossible through perspective limitation. The force remains as physical form dissolves. As consciousness transitions from individual limitation to cosmic connection, from the legendary Jedi Master to component element within universal composition, the artificial separation maintained through mortal existence revealed as temporary condition rather than fundamental reality. The corruption possible only through misidentification with specific form rather than universal substance. The suffering generated through attachment to particular narrative rather than acceptance of continuous transformation characteristic of existence itself, beyond Jedi, beyond Sith, beyond Empire. The cosmic pattern expressing fundamental nature through apparent chaos, through creation and destruction, through the continuous cycle, transcending mortal comprehension while remaining accessible through direct experience unfiltered by conceptual framework, by institutional interpretation, by the fundamental distortion inherent in translation of universal truth. Through limited perspective, darkness gives way to light beyond conventional categories, beyond simplistic binary classification, beyond the artificial separation maintained through institutional framework designed to control rather than illuminate, to direct rather than liberate, to serve specific purpose rather than universal function. The legendary life concludes not with defeat, but with completion, with acceptance, with the recognition possible only through surrender of the narrative itself, of the fundamental self-deception preventing clear assessment until consequence renders evaluation irrelevant, until nothing remains but honest accounting before inevitable conclusion, before the final transition from specific to universal, from temporary to eternal, from the corrupted form to the incorruptible substance existing beyond mortal limitation, beyond institutional definition, beyond the legendary life itself.